Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at this whole off-grid living thing. More and more people are ditching the traditional power grid and going off-grid to power their homes. We've got a really interesting article here that digs into what it actually takes to live that way. Like the benefits, the challenges, and also we've got some thoughts from people who are already doing it. One of the things that really stood out to me was how much more affordable solar panels and batteries have become. Like, it seems like off-grid systems are becoming more attainable than ever before. And get this, the traditional power grid loses a ton of electricity just from transmitting it. Can you believe that? Like 10%. It's crazy. But what I'm really curious about is, what does all this mean for the future of how we power our homes? And that's what we're going to be talking about today with our expert. They're here to help us connect the dots and see the bigger picture.
Yeah, I'm excited to dig into this too. It's a really fascinating topic.
So let's start with the basics. The article kicks off by talking about this whole shift towards off-grid living. And it seems like, you know, rising energy costs are a big part of what's driving this change.
It absolutely is. And, it's not just about the price we see on our monthly bills. We also have to think about the massive cost of maintaining that aging infrastructure, the traditional grid. When you factor all of that in, generating your own power suddenly starts to make a lot of financial sense.
Right. And the article really highlights how much the cost of solar panels and batteries has dropped recently. Like, that feels like a pretty major turning point.
It is. And what's making this even more viable is the advancements in battery technology, specifically lithium-ion and flow batteries. These are key to making off-grid living practical. Because they have the capacity to store all that energy your solar panels are soaking up during the day, which means you can still power your home at night or on cloudy days. And of course, as solar panels become more efficient, you're generating even more power from the same amount of sunlight.
And speaking of efficiency, what blew my mind? The article mentioned that traditional power grids lose something like 10% of electricity just during transmission. 10%? That just seems so wasteful.
Yeah, it does seem like a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But when you think about the vast distances that electricity has to travel on those power lines, some loss is inevitable. It all comes down to resistance. And that's a huge economic inefficiency that off-grid living completely sidesteps
Yeah.
because you're generating and using your own power right there on your property.
So it's not just about saving money on your energy bill. The article also dives into the resilience that off-grid systems offer, especially during power outages. Like if a big storm hits and knocks out the grid, your home is still up and running.
Exactly. And considering we're seeing more and more extreme weather events and even cyber attacks on the grid, that resilience is a huge draw for people.
Mm.
Having an off-grid system provides a sense of independence and security that you just don't get with a traditional setup.
Yeah, it's like peace of mind, knowing that you can keep your lights on, your refrigerator running, even charge your devices, while everyone else is in the dark scrambling for candles and generators.
It's a nice thought, but it's important to be realistic. Off-grid living isn't without its challenges.
Right, and the article doesn't shy away from those. It talks about the upfront costs, which, even though they've come down a lot, can still be a significant investment. And then there's the whole challenge of energy storage.
Yeah, even with amazing battery technology, there are limits to how much you can actually store. So you have to carefully think about your energy consumption, create a plan for how you're going to use energy, and potentially have backup solutions in place, like in case you have extended periods of low sunlight, or maybe you're running a lot of appliances, and you need more power than usual.
So it's not just as simple as sticking some solar panels on your roof and calling it a day. There's real planning involved to understand your energy needs and how to meet them.
Absolutely. It's all about finding the right balance
Yeah.
between how much energy you're generating, how much you can store, and how much you're actually using. It can be complex, but it's definitely achievable. And when you think about the potential benefits, it can be very rewarding.
Yeah, and the article highlights some really inspiring examples of people who have made the switch successfully, like this family in Hawaii who have been living completely off-grid for over a decade. And then there's this community in California who came together and created their own cooperative energy system.
What I find really interesting about those examples is that they show how off-grid living can go beyond individual choices. It can be a solution for entire communities where people are sharing resources and knowledge to create a more sustainable and resilient energy future together.
I thought it was really cool how the article included comments from readers, too. It was fascinating to see all the different reactions and perspectives that people had about this whole off-grid idea.
Yeah, you can tell people are passionate about this topic, and for good reason. It touches on so many important issues,
Hmm.
like everything from economics and the environment to personal freedom and how we want to live our lives.
Like Layla, for example, she was really excited about community solar programs and how crowdfunding could help make off-grid living more affordable and accessible, especially for lower-income households.
Yeah, that's such an important point. If we're going to transition to a more sustainable energy future, it needs to be equitable and attainable for everyone, regardless of their income level.
But then you have someone like Dawson, who has a very different take. He's actually concerned that off-grid living might end up just benefiting the wealthy and creating a new kind of energy elite, leaving those without resources even further behind.
It's understandable why Dawson would be concerned about that. Anytime we see a major technological shift, there's always a risk of unintended consequences. That's why it's crucial to have thoughtful policies in place, along with ethical considerations, to guide how we approach this transition and make sure that it truly benefits everyone.
So it's not just about the technology itself, but about how we choose to implement it and the systems we build around it to create a just and fair transition.
Exactly. We need to be having these conversations now, while this technology is evolving, because the decisions we make today are going to shape the future of energy and how our society functions as a whole.
Wow, we've covered so much already, and it feels like we're just getting started. I'm eager to dive even deeper into all of this.
Before we jump into the next part of our conversation, it's worth circling back to those contrasting viewpoints we heard from readers. A lot of people seem to be concerned about whether off-grid living is really going to be accessible for everyone, especially for those who might not have the money for a big upfront investment in things like solar panels and batteries.
Yeah, that's a really valid concern. I mean, even with costs coming down, setting up a whole off-grid system is a pretty big expense, and we can't ignore the possibility that it could create even bigger economic divides. If this transition isn't handled carefully.
Absolutely, and that's why it's important to explore some of the potential solutions that could help bridge that gap. You mentioned earlier that one reader, Layla, was really enthusiastic about community solar programs and how crowdfunding could play a role. What are your thoughts on those ideas?
I think they're definitely worth exploring. The idea of community solar, where you have multiple households sharing a solar array, could be a game changer in terms of lowering costs and making clean energy more accessible, especially for people who can't install solar panels on their own property. Maybe they're renting or they don't have a suitable roof. And crowdfunding could definitely help with that initial financial hurdle that a lot of people face.
Those are definitely promising avenues. But it's also important to think about the practical side of things. Like,
Yeah.
not every community has the space or the resources to set up these large-scale solar installations.
Right. And that brings up some logistical questions too. Where would these community solar farms be located? And how would the energy be distributed to all the households involved? There's a lot of planning and collaboration that would need to happen to make it work effectively.
Exactly. So, while community solar has huge potential, we can't just assume it's a simple plug-and-play solution.
Yeah.
It requires careful consideration of the infrastructure and logistics involved.
And then on the flip side, there's Dawson's perspective,
Mm.
which is kind of a worst case scenario where off-grid living actually ends up creating this whole new energy elite, leaving those without resources in an even more vulnerable position.
It's a provocative viewpoint, but it does raise a very important question. How do we prevent a future where clean energy becomes a luxury that's only accessible to the wealthy? We've seen this happen before with other technologies, where the benefits aren't distributed evenly across society.
It makes me think about the role of government in all of this. Could we see things like incentives or subsidies, or even programs specifically designed to help lower-income households retrofit their homes with solar and make that transition more affordable?
Those are definitely possibilities. And we should also be thinking about things like microgrids. Have you heard of those?
I've heard the term, but I'll admit I don't fully understand how they work.
Essentially, a microgrid is like a mini power grid that can operate independently from the main grid. Imagine a neighborhood or a small community being able to generate and manage their own electricity. It's about increasing resilience and reducing reliance on those big centralized utility companies.
So instead of everyone being dependent on this massive interconnected grid, you could have these smaller, localized energy systems that are more adaptable and resilient, especially in emergencies.
Precisely. And microgrids could play a crucial role in ensuring more equitable access to clean energy, especially in areas that might not be well served by traditional utilities.
So it sounds like there isn't one single solution, but rather a combination of approaches that need to work together to address both the technological and social aspects of this energy transition.
You hit the nail on the head. Going off-grid isn't as simple as flipping a switch. It requires us to rethink how we generate, distribute, and consume energy, and to ensure that everyone benefits from this shift toward a more sustainable model.
Up until now, we've mostly been focusing on the economic and resilience benefits of off-grid living, but I think it's time we address the elephant in the room, which is the environmental impact. I mean, for a lot of people, that's a huge motivator for considering going off-grid.
It's arguably the most significant aspect of this whole movement. The environmental benefits of generating your own clean energy are undeniable. When you're powering your home with solar or wind, you're significantly reducing your reliance on fossil fuels, which has a direct impact on reducing carbon emissions.
The article mentions something pretty incredible. If enough people adopted off-grid systems, it could potentially cut global carbon emissions from electricity generation by as much as 50%. That's a massive impact.
It really highlights the potential for off-grid living to be a major solution in addressing climate change. But of course, it's not without its own environmental considerations.
Right. There are still challenges with things like the manufacturing process for solar panels and batteries, and what happens to those components at the end of their lifespan.
Those are valid concerns, and they're being addressed by the industry. There's a lot of innovation happening in terms of developing more sustainable manufacturing practices and figuring out how to recycle these technologies more effectively.
So it's about acknowledging the challenges, but also recognizing the progress that's being made to minimize the environmental footprint of these technologies.
Exactly. And understanding that sustainability is a journey, not a destination. We need to constantly strive to improve and find ways to make our energy systems cleaner and more efficient.
Well, it seems like every time we peel back a layer of this off-grid onion, there's a whole new set of perspectives and considerations to explore. It's clear that there are both tremendous opportunities and potential challenges to navigate.
It's a complex issue, no doubt about it. But what I find so exciting is that we're actually having these conversations, exploring the possibilities and pushing for a more sustainable and equitable energy future.
I agree. And it feels like we're on the cusp of a major shift in how we think about and use energy. And it's incredible to see how individuals, communities, and even whole industries are starting to embrace this change.
It's a truly transformative time. And I think the key takeaway here is that we all have a role to play in shaping this energy future, whether it's making changes in our own homes, supporting policies that promote clean energy, or even just staying informed and engaged in these conversations.
I love that. It's empowering to know that we're not just passive bystanders in all of this. We can actively participate in creating the kind of energy future we want to see for ourselves and for generations to come.
And that's where innovation and human ingenuity really shine. There's so much potential for creative solutions and new technologies to emerge as we continue down this path.
It almost feels like we're collectively writing a new chapter in the story of energy, and we're still figuring out how the story unfolds.
The ending is yet to be written. But I believe that by working together, sharing knowledge, and embracing innovation, we can create a future where clean, affordable, and reliable energy is available to everyone.
This conversation has been so insightful. It's really got me thinking about my own energy choices and how I can be part of this positive change.
I'm glad to hear that. And I hope all of our listeners are feeling inspired to learn more and get involved in this conversation, because it's a topic that affects us all.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the economics and environmental benefits of off-grid living to the potential challenges and the importance of equitable access. It's been incredibly illuminating.
It has been. And we've only just scratched the surface of this topic. There's so much more to explore as we continue this journey.
Before we wrap up, I think it would be helpful to distill all of this into some key takeaways for our listeners. What are the most important things they should walk away with?
It is a lot to think about.
Yeah.
But even if our listeners just remember a few key points, I think it'll make a difference.
Yeah, I think so too. So first and foremost, this deep dive has shown just how much potential there is in off-grid living, not just for, individuals, but for whole communities.
Exactly. And with that potential comes a lot of important things to think about.
Yeah.
Like we talked about, equitable access, responsible innovation, and really well thought out policies, all to make sure that this transition to a more decentralized energy system actually benefits everyone. So beyond the big picture, what can our listeners do in their own lives?
Well, I think it starts with awareness. like
Yeah.
really understanding how off-grid living works, what technologies are there, and what it might mean for,
Right.
your own life and your community.
Yeah, it all comes down to asking yourself a few questions. Could off-grid living work for me? What are my energy needs? What am I looking for? And what am I worried about?
And it's not just about thinking about it, it's about actually doing something. Maybe that means, doing some research, looking into the different options out there, or even talking to people who are already living off-grid and learning from what they've done,
Exactly. And the article we talk about had some great examples of people who've done it successfully. It also mentioned things like community solar programs
right?
and crowdfunding,
Yeah.
which could be great resources for people who are interested but don't know where to start.
It's easy to focus on the individual side of off-grid living, like how much money you can save or how resilient you can be. But I really like that we've also talked about the potential for working together. This isn't just about individual choices. It's about creating a movement toward a more sustainable and resilient energy future for everyone.
It is. And remember, you don't have to go completely off-grid all at once. You can take things slow, maybe start with some solar panels to help out with your connection to the main grid. And then you can slowly become more independent over time.
That's a good point. It's all about finding what works for you and taking steps towards living more sustainably.
And as technology gets better, we can expect to see even more efficient and affordable off-grid solutions, which will make it possible for more people to live this way. It's an exciting time.
It really is. It's not just about unplugging from the grid. It's about a whole new way of thinking about energy, one that gives power to individuals, strengthens communities, and ultimately protects our planet.
Yeah, and I think that's the perfect way to wrap up our conversation. It's about realizing that we have the power to shape how energy works in the future. And we can create a world where everyone has access to clean and reliable power.
That's an amazing goal, and I think it's something worth working towards. So, to all our listeners out there, keep learning, stay curious, and remember that knowledge is power.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you on our next deep dive.